Hello and welcome to a new lesson in communication research. I am Sakshi Mandwal and the subject expert is Dr. Debarati Dhar, Assistant Professor at Vivekananda Institute of Professional Studies, New Delhi. Today in this module, we will be discussing about ethnographic methods. In our previous modules, we have understood about various research methodologies and their importance in various disciplines. In the present module, we would be understanding ethnographic methods, its meaning, importance and challenges in communication research. Ethnographic research is synonymously used as qualitative research. We have learnt in one of our previous modules that ethnography, however, is a special kind of qualitative research in which researchers usually spend long hours living with and observing other cultures in nature setting. Ethnography is largely practiced by anthropologists and sociologists. Ethnographic methods are sometimes defined as distinct from other forms of research because of its substantial use of qualitative data. One of the primary guiding principles of ethnography is its obligation to direct experience with the population or community of concern or study. It is the constant exposure and engagement with the research setting rather than the specifics of methodology alone that differentiates ethnography from other research approaches. To put it in similar words, ethnography is always conducted in naturalistic settings, favorable to face-to-face interaction with the people, events and social phenomena that constitute the research setting. Moreover, ethnography seeks to understand the human world and its internal and external phenomena from the perspective of the people being studied rather than solely from the researcher's own perspective or a specific theoretical lens. Ethnography is derived from the Greek ethnos, nation, and graph, writing. So it means writing about nations including cultures, way of life, people. Ethnographic research methodology was developed for the study of unfamiliar and exotic cultures. In the most recent years, ethnographers has turned towards the more unfamiliar and exotic aspects of their own culture. The term ethnography has been specifically applied to those studies of media audiences that closely observe the actual behavior of audiences while they interact with media, like for example while watching television and later question them about the particular media behavior. What we gather from the discussion so far is that ethnographic research has developed a set of perspectives, methods, tools and logics which help ensure that ethnographic researchers actually learn to understand the world through the eyes of a specific population. Putting all these tools to use is defined to as the field experience, in which the field becomes the area where all the work or research is taking place. Ethnographic method is considered as the best for a cultural anthropological base survey. In other words, as for anthropological study, where the study of culture is involved, it is believed to be helped by ethnographical research. Research studies where culture, media, etc. are involved, ethnographic methods are considered appropriate. It might include observation, participant observation, focus group and interview. We will now elaborately look into all these methods one by one. But before getting into all these tools, we will gather some information and understanding of what ethnographic research is. Ethnographic research. The most common sources of data on institutions or audiences are observation and documentation. We have learned about the significance of documentation in our previous module. Social scientists are largely familiar with observation and it is also used in other disciplines. It would be wrong to make an assumption about any single method, as every method has its own intellectual framework. For instance, methods of observation are specific to the research project. However, all forms of observation share a common goal, that is the description. Ethnography is thick description and it is a multiplicity of complex conceptual structures. Doing ethnography is like trying to read, or in other words, construct a reading of manuscript or commentaries written in a particular shaped behavior. Regardless of its approach or focus, ethnography is characterized by 4 qualities, which are: ethnography puts the researcher in the middle of the topic under study. That is, the researcher goes to the data for developing the study. Ethnography highlights studying an issue or topic from the participant's frame of reference. This method comprises spending a considerable amount of time in the field. Ethnography uses a variety of research techniques, including observation, interviewing, diary keeping, and analysis of existing documents, photography, videotaping, and more. Ethnographic research basically blends together the outsider perspective of the researcher with the insider perspective of those individuals under observation. Ethnographic research relies upon an assortment of data collection techniques. Personal testimony is one of the parts of ethnography. Interestingly, ethnography can be both qualitative as well as quantitative. While text data is indeed an important component of ethnography, ethnography is not by any means exclusively qualitative. Ethnography usually is defined as chiefly focused on qualitative text-based data collected through key informant, semi-structured and in-depth interviewing, and through unstructured or semi-structured face-to-face or audio-visual observation and recording. Researchers can begin their data collection by starting with either qualitative or quantitative data. Let us now have a look at the different ways of collecting data from the field. Observation and participant. Observation method. Observation can be a research method in its own, right, for instance, in field, or it can be a supplement to other methods like participant observation or interviews. In the context of research, observation is more than just looking. It is purposeful looking and recording of the results. In other words, this process involves the researcher taking part in the research situation while observing it, either from outside the situation or as complete observer by becoming a part of the situation. It further involves the researcher personally observing samples over time of exterior physical signs, expressive movement, physical location, and along with that, language behavior. Taking observation of any situation can be intrusive in itself. One of the advantages of observation is that it offers objectivity by allowing the behavior under examination to continue in its natural setting. That is often precisely the point of research study. Moreover, it also minimizes the impact of the researcher on the situation under observation. Simple observation is rarely encountered in media audience research. It is participant observation which is rather more common in this subfield. So what we understand here is that observation is not just about looking, but it is about looking purposefully. Observation method provides a key form of data for ethnographers and sociologists. This method was first developed within a positivist framework and is now widely applied in every discipline of social science. For instance, observed behavior is a valuable source for historians. Traditional ethnography has produced a number of positions for the researcher as observer in the context of the research. The debate about whether the ethnographic researcher could be inside and outside continues. Different theorists have different opinions, like positivists will seek objectivity, while non-positivists deal with the concept of subjectivity. There are ways of observing institutions discreetly from the outside. However, this is difficult in the case of media. Now we shall discuss about participant observation method. Participant observation method is most common in institutional media research. It means that the researcher is directly involved in the social practices of the institution under study. This method is comparatively time-consuming and difficult. Social interaction is best observed in the social setting, in which the behavior would normally occur rather than in the control environment of survey or an experiment. Through participant observation, a diverse data can be obtained, making it possible for in-depth description. Moreover, through participant observation, it is also possible to gain access to participants' own understandings of the situation, that too in their own expressions of words. As participant observation involves working in the field, in ethnography, field is described as the social situation under study. So, ethnography is often referred to as field research. As we understand from the term itself that participant observation doesn't occur in isolation. It is backed up with document analysis, interviews and possibly questionnaires, surveys and case studies. One area of media research that often involves participant observation is studies comprising the production process where the researcher becomes attached to the production team of television or radio programming. For instance, participant observation can be used for researching the effectiveness of the censorship classification system in excluding the attendance of underage children from restricted classification films. Among several ways of studying this is that the researcher might start by simply observing the consumers lining up at the ticket counter and watching how they interact with the ticket seller. Such type of informal observation might help in deciding where the issue is sufficiently significant for further exploration. Once that decision is being made, the researcher might study it from inside the institution, that is the cinema, through participant observation. The shift from simple observation to participant observation takes place here when the researcher becomes a part of the entire management through proper procedure. So, what we gather is that a researcher can be either a complete participant or a participant come observer in the field. In practice, the role of the researcher might shift among the various categories of observation, and it certainly changes over time as quite expectedly professional or personal relationships cultivate between the researcher and people in the social setup or institution being studied. Challenges of observation and participant observation. So far, we have seen the advantages of observation and participant observation, like how it helps in studying the exact behavior or the institution under study. But now we will look at the various problems of these methods. One of the major problems of observation is that the researcher is necessarily implicated in the situation under observation. Hence, if the researcher is already an integral part of the situation under observation, then maintaining objectivity might be difficult. Audio or videotaping or taking notes during the observation can be intrusive where the subject may object or may change behavior as a result of being aware of being observed. In other words, the presence of the researcher within a situation might subtly alter the situation in turn, compromising the data collected. Taking notes may not adequately record what happened and may be tilted by the researcher's own experience or bias. Moreover, audio and videotaping is difficult and need expertise to handle. Plus, it is also time consuming to analyze, though they are highly objective. In the same context, notes are easier to analyze, but they can be subjective and there are chances of biasness from the researcher's own experience or understanding. Ethnographic research also has ethical problems. For instance, the researcher may also have difficulty avoiding taking slides in any complex situation if it arises within the group under observation. If the researcher enters the situation for the sake of the research, then he or she might not be familiar enough with the social setup to completely understand, and hence the research might be compromised. Besides the problem of subjectivity and biasness, some other problems also remain. Like there are always issues of the comparative status of the researcher and the people within the situation under study. Further, there are possibilities that the relationship between the researcher and the host organization or institution might sour at some point of time. This can lead to some unwanted problems in finalizing the research. Well, all these problems do not necessarily invalidate the ethnography method. It just requires a lot of caution and even larger care during analysis and interpretation. As we have learnt earlier that in present time, innovative ethnographic research requires and includes a mix of qualitative and quantitative methods that are triangulated for conceptualizing and collecting data. However, scholars agree that there is a little chance of the researcher becoming so caught up in the situation under study that there comes a possibility of the researcher losing sight of the original intention of the research process. The ethnographer may attempt to stand outside the culture in order to avoid contaminating behavior or allowing her own biases to affect the results. But there is always a possibility of an outsider misunderstanding the culture because the more complex it is, the more an insider understands it differently from even an impartial observer. In another case, the ethnographer may also attempt to become an insider for empathizing with the culture or even to socialize within it as a complete participant. It is still difficult to do, as attempting to see from inside can still lead to misunderstandings and can still produce false information. One of the common reasons for such misunderstandings could be those long-lasting members of the culture resisting the intrusion of any outsider. All these lead to the risk of researcher going native, that is, taking the position of the insider so thoroughly that it distorts both the researcher process as well as the results. So, as we see, there are several challenges associated with ethnographic study. Interview method. Interviewing is defined as the purposive conversation. The interviewer is always a part of the interview process and is always an observer of the process. It proves that interviewing is clearly related to participant observation. Interviewing in the field is considered as one of the standard methods for ethnography, and many texts have been written by scholars giving advice on how to do an accurate interview and maintain its value. Interviewing can be done individually or in groups in a structured, unstructured or semi-structured format. One of the significant values of the interview is that this method provides opportunities for interviewees to respond in their own terms through their own linguistic structure. Moreover, this method also provides for the scope of collecting verbal answers, which can be longer and little complex and hence can be more rich and interesting as compared to written answers. Other factor that adds value to the method of interview is the fact that simply observing might not provide the information that is sought, or as we have noted earlier that there is a possibility that more observing might provide only ambiguous data. So, asking the person directly helps in clarifying what has been already observed. But one has to be very careful while interviewing, as this process is never as accurately objective given the situation that the interviewer is always found implicated in the interview situation. Types of interview. Structured interview. The standardized open-ended structured interview is usually done with an individual, as it takes the form of a survey questionnaire administered by the researcher. The questions are carefully worded and arranged to be delivered identically to all respondents. Interviews can use both open and closed questions, depending entirely upon the circumstances. Like questionnaires, standardized, open-ended interviews can be conducted face-to-face or by telephone with similar advantages and disadvantages. The general interview guide approach, or the semi-structured interview, starts with a basic checklist of areas to be covered in the interview. In structure, it falls somewhere between standardized open-ended interview and the informal interview guide, and hence it can be called semi-structured. In this particular type of interview, the interviewer can respond to any situation which emerges during the course of the interview. For instance, if during the course of the interview, the interviewee raises any concern or issue that was not anticipated, then that can be quickly addressed by the interviewer. Like informal conversation, it can elicit very personal responses. Unstructured interview. The informal conversational interview or unstructured interview can take place in any situation where the interviewer and interviewee are comfortably and can sit and communicate. For any interview, obtaining the consent of the interviewee is of utmost importance. Like it is considered preferable and ethical for the interviewer to explain the purpose of the conversation. Informal conversation is the most interviewing technique most commonly used in the field, or basically to add depth to data obtained by participant observation. It is specifically useful in cases where the interviewee needs to feel completely comfortable before about sensitive topics. One of the strengths of this kind of interviews are the highly individual responses that it generates and the possibility of continuing the interview later or even allowing the information to build naturally. One of the major problems of informal conversation is that it is too widely to be useful with groups, and it also needs good rapport to be established between the interviewer and interviewee. Challenges of interviewing. Just like the other methods of ethnography, interview method also has a set of challenges. As we have already noticed that there is the question of objectivity in this process, because there might be difficulties with how respondents engage with the interviewer, and that might affect the responses. To elaborate it further, we can put it in this way, that respondents might not be able to articulate what they think or believe or feel, or there is a possibility that respondents might misinterpret the interviewer's question, or in certain cases, respondents might have given answers assuming that this is what the interviewer wants to hear. There is no scope of further validation if the respondents deliberately lie or give misleading facts. Moreover, interview data is essentially discursive. That makes it difficult to interpret. Interviewing involves the exercise of a powerful differential, usually with the interviewee less powerful than the interviewer. Focus group interview. Focus group interviews are different from the individual interviews, not only logistically but in the meaning of underlying principle. We understood already that individual interview aims to obtain information from a person away from others who might possibly influence the interviewee's response. In the past, focus group was simply an extension of individual interview, used to save money and time by providing more interview subjects. In more recent times, the focus group interview has been used precisely to find out how people respond in a group, which is how their feelings or opinions can be shaped by the experience of discussing the subject with others. It can even be seen as stimulating the kind of group process usually studied in the field by ethnographic research. In focus group interview technique, the group is mostly selected purposely. Focus group discussions can also be seen as empowering participants. The ideal size for a focus group is ideally 6 to 10 participants. It provides enough space and scope for lively discussion. Participants are selected appropriate for the subject and also on the basis of the intellectual framework of the study. Conclusion. To sum up, we can say that ethnography is one method that cannot be broken up into sequential stages, as everything happens at once, though each stage needs individual thinking and analyzing. We also learned that the most common sources of data collection on institutions specifically are observation and participant observation. Social scientists are more familiar with the ethnographic methods. Interestingly, researcher from the cultural studies and media study fields uses ethnographic methods frequently along with the empirical methods. Ethnography involves both qualitative as well as quantitative data. Ethnography examines a culture from the outside, mostly objectively, and audience data can be gathered by observation, participant observation, or interview method depending on the requirement of the study. With this, we have come to the end of today's lesson on ethnographic methods. That is all that we had for you for today. Thank you so much for watching. Till the next time, it's a goodbye.